Miltel moves that given Terry Lynn McClintic was convicted of first-degree murder in the horrific abduction, rape, and murder of 8-year-old Tori Stafford and was moved from a secure facility to a healing lodge without fences, and where the government has confirmed the presence of children, the House condemn this decision and call upon the government to exercise its moral, legal, and political authority to ensure this decision is reversed and cannot happen again in other cases. Debate. The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will be splitting my time today with the member from Parry Sound, Muskoka. April 8, 2009 began like any other school day for Tori Stafford, a grade 3 student at Oliver Stevens Public School. But, Mr. Speaker, that is where this sweet little 8-year-old girl's normal, peaceful day ended. Tori was lured, kidnapped, and later brutally murdered. Tori's killers, Michael Rafferty and Terry Lynn McClintic, were each found guilty of first-degree murder. In Canada, that means an automatic life sentence. 25 years without a chance of parole. So it would seem that maybe justice was somewhat served for the Staffords and for their family. But sadly, that's not what's turned out to be the case. We have learned in recent days, Mr. Speaker, that the prisoner McClintic, instead of serving her sentence behind bars, has been transferred to a Saskatchewan healing lodge, a government-run lodge surrounded by trees, wildlife, and children. There's no visible security. There is not even a fence. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's a no-brainer for all of us to know that that is no place for a child killer. It is certainly no place for someone who committed the despicable acts that Tori faced in her last hours. The details of those acts have been recounted to the House. Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment and comment on the reaction of members of the government and the NDP when some of those details were recounted, because it goes to the point that not only we as Conservatives are making, but the Canadians want us to face. The Prime Minister's reaction to hearing about what happened to Tori was to tell members of Parliament essentially to shut up and stop talking. Other members got visibly angry and upset and talked about decorum in the House, as if what happened to Tori and whether or not that offends us has anything to do or matters about decorum. It is not about our feelings. It is not about our sensitivities being offended. It is not about how we feel in this House. And that's, Madam Speaker, that is what we need to talk about. What we need to talk about is justice for Tori's family. What happened to Tori was despicable and unbearable to hear, but this place is exactly where we need to face a harsh but needed reality. There are consequences of the decisions that we make here in this place. Pretending like these gruesome events didn't happen and demanding that others shut up to avoid hearing them is the behavior that led us exactly to where we are right now. It's that sort of behavior which leads the Public Safety Minister to describe the horrible acts committed against Tori Stafford as, quote, bad practices. It's that sort of behavior which desensitizes some into thinking that a child murderer with no possibility of legally seeing the outside world for at least 15 more years shouldn't be behind bars, but should be a guest at a government lodge. It's that sort of behavior which leads the Liberals to brush this shocking transfer off by organizing some sort of generic bureaucratic review. And that is the behavior that should be offensive to all of us, Madam Speaker, and that's what we need to address today. It's said that the worst fate a parent can endure is to have to bury his or her own child, and to have to do so in the circumstances faced by the Stafford family is just unimaginable. And that's why we can only imagine, and we need to think about and think long and hard about what the transfer of this prisoner has done to the Stafford family and the effect that it has had on the family. It's re-victimized the Stafford family. In fact, this past weekend, Tori's dad, Rodney Stafford, published an open letter to the Prime Minister. His words are utterly heart-wrenching. Mr. Stafford wrote, and I quote, "I plead to you as a father and a proud Canadian citizen who, even after this traumatic experience, tries to live a normal tax-paying life. I really have to question our federal government as to why convicted child murderer such as Terry Lynn McClintic deserves more rights than their victims and law-abiding Canadians. I may not have grown up living a perfect life, but I grew up to learn that I love the country I live in and I know right from wrong. End quote. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister has tried to duck and weave on this issue this last week, pleading that this was all about politics. But you know what, Madam Speaker? Rodney Stafford hit the nail on the head. He asked the Prime Minister, he said, is this enough to remember that not all issues are political, some are moral? And that's what this issue is, Madam Speaker. Tory's dad is right. There is a moral imperative for action. There's a moral imperative for members of Parliament from all parties to stand up and demand better. This is a situation that we need to reverse, and one which we need to prevent from ever happening again. It's the sort of situation where immediate action is required to maintain Canadians' confidence in our justice system. Madam Speaker, I had the honour to serve for more than 2 years as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety. Our previous government showed how you can take action. When things happen in situations, the government does have the power to reverse it. When tough cases were exposed when we were in government and they cried out for change. When it was uncovered that serial killer Clifford Olson was receiving OAS, our Conservative government passed legislation to stop him and other prisoners. So there's the key. It wasn't just something directed specifically at Clifford Olson. It was a policy change which stopped him from getting OAS, but it also stopped other prisoners from getting OAS. It's been done before, it can be done again. We also passed legislation preventing prisoners from using their time behind bars to justify an extension of employment insurance benefits. Again, Madam Speaker, it was not changing policy directed at one individual inmate, but we saw that something had happened when we were government that needed to be reversed in our correctional system, and so we immediately implemented the policy so that that specific person would not receive that benefit, nor would other prisoners in that same situation. So the situation what confronts us today is one which the Liberal government and the Prime Minister possess the legal and the political authority to fix. Now, we're likely to hear about a legal opinion which mysteriously surfaced last week claiming the Liberals just can't do anything. And you know, Madam Speaker, I'm sure that the government lawyer who wrote that document is an upstanding person, but we do have to remember at the end of the day, government lawyers serve their clients. They're political masters in the Justice Minister's office and the Prime Minister's office. And since when does a government abdicate their responsibility just because a lawyer told them maybe they would have a little bit of pushback on it? Since when does a government, especially this government, which sure seems to love to go to bat for every criminal that there is, whether it's Omar Khadr, Chris Garnier, or now McClintic, they sure don't seem to worry about fighting those fights. So why in the world would they not say, listen, we'll take the chance that maybe somebody might challenge us, but we see this wrong is done and we're going to correct it. It's that simple. It's not difficult. Now, there are a few provisions in the law that I do want to just highlight. The Corrections and Conditional Release Act does give authority to the government. We've already talked about subsection 6.1 of the Act, which says the Commissioner of Corrections works under the direction of the Minister. Paragraph 96D of the Act actually enables the Governor and Council, the Cabinet, to make regulations governing the process of transferring offenders from one institution to another. Meanwhile, paragraph 96 allows the Cabinet to adopt regulations concerning the security classification of inmates. So there can be a policy crafted. It could be as simple as saying that someone serving a sentence for the murder of a child must not be transferred to any institution without perimeter security or where children are permitted to circulate. It's very simple. That could very easily be done. You know, Madam Speaker, this is all we're asking the government to do. First of all, we have not seen any outrage from them, and we've not seen any action. In an interview last week, Tory's dad said, and I quote, "Terry Lynn has been moved to Saskatchewan to this healing lodge, and I was kind of blown away. Every time things seem to start to get a bit better, something like this comes along where you just lose faith." Madam Speaker, let's give the Stafford family some faith by reversing this injustice. Let's give Canadians confidence in their justice system. Let's send a strong and a clear message with the vote on this motion. Let's stand up, every single one of us, and vote to ensure that anyone who takes the life of innocent children like Tory Stafford face the sentence which Canadians expect them to, and that is behind bars. Madam Speaker, we have an opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of real people. We know their names, we know the situation they faced, we know the horrific acts that happened. We very seldom have the opportunity to affect individual people's lives like we do today. And so I implore this House, I implore the government, show your displeasure, show your outrage, but more importantly, act, implement policy to reverse this decision and make sure something like this never happens again.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Mont-Royal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think we all in this House share the same sorrow for the Stafford family and the same outrage about the killer being in a facility like this. I don't think that's in question. I think the question is, how do we make a policy change? And I want to ask the honourable member a question. This facility, these healing lodges, were developed in 1992 and put into law under a Conservative government. So clearly the Conservatives don't believe the healing lodges shouldn't exist. This healing lodge had medium and minimum security prisoners during the entire 10 years of the Harper government. So clearly the Conservatives didn't oppose medium security prisoners being transferred there. Terry McClintic became a medium security prisoner in 2014 during the Harper government, and that government didn't stop that. So clearly the previous Conservative government hadn't opposed that. What is exactly the solution you prefer? Should there be no healing lodges? Should medium security prisoners not be in healing lodges? Or should first-degree murderers not be allowed to become medium security prisoners? I'd like to know the solution.
So I just want to remind the member to address the question and comments to the chair and not to individual members. The honourable member for Portage-Lisgar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, first of all, I want to say that that member is the actual first Liberal member of Parliament who has said that there's any outrage on that side of the House at this decision. We've been asking the Prime Minister and the Minister of Public Safety, and we have not heard once that, yes, this is a terrible decision. No, what we've heard from the Liberal side is we're going to form a committee to look at the policy to see if all the policies were followed. So, frankly, the outrage is too little and too late. Second question, Madam Speaker, I would be more than happy to lay out a very simple plan for the government on how they could very easily reverse this decision. And I'm going to tell you how come Tori's dad and family even knew what was happening. It's because we passed in 2013-14, we passed a law where victims were now being informed of what's happening to some of these prisoners. So I will tell that member this. If we had found out about this while we were in government, as we did with other bad decisions, we would have been the government, taken the decision, changed it, and made that policy a good policy. And that's what we're asking this government to do. And if they can't do it, get out of the way and let somebody...
Questions and comments? L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chamblay.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I just want to address the issue of the rhetoric and this issue around the graphic details being shared. And contrary to what the member has just said about telling people they should shut up, it's quite the opposite. In fact, in an interview I had on the weekend, I even had an opportunity to reiterate that these are important questions that need to be asked. It is our responsibility on that. I wholeheartedly agree with the Conservatives. However, as politicians, as people who express ourselves in a very public way, despite the public nature of these details, despite the fact that I have pored over them as a participant in this debate and this unimaginable feeling that you get hearing these details, the problem is that when the rhetoric heats up like that, when these details are used for political gain, the consequence of that is messages like I received over the weekend as the stepfather of an 8-year-old girl being told, maybe the same thing needs to happen to your daughter so you understand what is going on here. And that, Mr. Speaker, is why we have, and perhaps I can have a little respect instead of being heckled, that is exactly why we have a responsibility for how we address these issues. No one is saying they shouldn't be addressed, but there's a proper way to do it. Would my colleague acknowledge that? I'm not asking her to take responsibility for the individuals' words to me, but I am asking that we take responsibilities for the things we say in this place and how we tackle these extremely difficult issues.
The Honourable Official Opposition House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I don't know if that member heard my speech. I just gave a lengthy speech where I laid out what I believed and what we believe should happen. There was nothing that should have offended him. And you know, Madam Speaker, I'm sorry. He's not the victim here, okay? He is not the victim. I'm not sure what message he's referring to. This is the place where we have to have tough conversations. We had a difficult conversation one day in this House where we talked about what happened to Tory. It had to be heard. We had a Minister of Public Safety that called what happened to Tory bad practices. We had to do it. We have now been asking the government to act on it. And the NDP, we don't even know if they're going to support it. And that member stood up, and somehow he's maybe the victim in all of this because we had to talk about something that's difficult.
Shame.
Shameful of the NDP. I don't know what they have been thinking these last few weeks, but they are going to have to be answering to their constituents on how they vote and how they've responded to this.
I just want to remind members that, yes, this is a very difficult situation to talk about, but I think that I would ask all members to be very respectful of different points of view on this here, as to not offend each of the member either. So again, I think that, you know, it is going to be a very difficult debate, but I think that everybody can be respectful of each other. The honourable member for Parry Sound Muskoka, resuming debate.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and colleagues, and thank you for